The popular comic-style novel Watchmen portrays many themes and parallels connecting the present-day society to the Vietnam War. One of the major comparisons of today's society to the society in the 60s is the theme of freedom versus confinement. The decade of peace, love, and harmony was brought about by the ability of members of society to do whatever pleased them. It was the beginning of college students openly protesting the war on their campuses. It was the beginning of mass rioting, not only against the war, but also against the civil concerns regarding race that were taking place at that time. There was freedom of the press, for this was the first televised war. This was not a brutal war in nature when compared to the cruelties of the previous world wars, but it was the first time the majority of America's society was seeing the horrors that occurred on a daily basis involving their sons, their husbands, and their fathers. This freedom of the press was mirrored by the freedom of any type of American, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or religion, to choose to fight for their country. These freedoms were expressed throughout the novel of Watchmen. For example, Laurie states, "We're young lovers. The world could end tomorrow. And how are we spending our Sunday evening? We're planning to bust a homicidal maniac out of Sing Sing." She is laughing at the irony of their freedoms, which had not been expressed specifically by their society in previous decades. Dr. Manhattan had so much freedom that when he got fed up with everything going on in his life, he said, "I'm leaving this galaxy for one less complicated," and then literally left the planet Earth and went to sit alone in isolation on another planet. While this is considered the decade of freedoms, there were still areas of confinement prevalent throughout society that were mirrored in Watchmen. Even though one could choose whether or not he wants to go fight for his country, there was still a draft in which male citizens would be forced to join the military and go fight for his country. Also, there was constantly the threat, once in Vietnam, of being captured and becoming a prisoner of war. These prisoners were not treated well, and they represented some of the utmost confinement seen during the 60s. These feelings of confinement were shown throughout Watchmen by most of the characters. Even though Laurie had earlier expressed how free she felt, she mentions how she feels so cooped up sometimes and how she just needs a night out. She's recognizing she has the freedom to go out but still feels so confined that she stays at home and doesn't capitalize on the opportunity. She also mentions that she's being a kept woman for the military secret weapon and how she should be given some kind of compensation every once in a while. Dr. Long assures his wife that Rorschach is under heavy guard and is no threat to anyone in the surrounding areas. This sounds a lot like the mentalities when guarding the prisoners of war in Vietnam. They were locked up and heavily guarded and not let loose from the guards' sights. In response, Rorschach says, "I got the bad side of isolation without the compensations, like privacy." He's making a strong allusion to the mindsets of the prisoners of war captured during the Vietnam War. He also told the other prisoners that they were locked up with him instead of vice versa. Lastly, Rorschach is told that he is alone in the Valley of the Shadow, which is an obvious reference to the Bible. However, with this reference comes the knowledge that Rorschach does not fear evil, for he knows that God or the government or whoever is in charge is with him. This knowledge leads back into the sensing of freedom. There is always a taste of freedom both in the novel Watchmen and during the Vietnam War and surrounding decades.